Oil. They call it black gold, the world's liquid currency. But is it the future or just the expensive evidence of an unsustainable age? As the oil cartel OPEC turns 50, we ask what the future holds and whether oil will continue to dominate the world's energy markets. This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story. Today we're coming to you from A&M University here in Qatar. Now, right now there's an international forum taking place marking the 50th anniversary of OPEC. That's the oil cartel that determines essentially how much you and I pay for our petrol. Let's just give you some of the history of OPEC. In 1960, OPEC was founded to secure stable supplies and fair prices for oil. The cartel was soon blamed for high costs, accused of controlling oil prices by limiting production. The counterclaim is that the international oil market was dominated by huge multinational energy companies, most of them American. In the 70s, oil prices rose steeply, but the artificial price rise made it economically feasible for non-OPEC countries to produce and export their own oil, stripping OPEC of its market dominance. In the 80s, of course, prices began to weaken, crashing in 1986. But then in 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the price of oil hit an all-time high. By the end of that decade, the Asian crisis cut demand and pushed prices to a low of less than $10 a barrel. Following the most recent war in Iraq, prices climbed again, soaring to record levels by 2008 and breaking the $100 barrier for the first time in history, before once again collapsing in the face of worldwide economic recession. So that's the rollercoaster ride of oil over the past 50 years. Joining us now to discuss this is the Qatari Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Energy and Industry as well, Abdullah bin Hamad al-Attiyah. Jochen Weiss, member of the board of directors of E.ON Ruhrgas, one of Europe's largest energy providers, and also Mohamed Ajour, a senior professor and coordinator of petroleum engineering program at Texas A&M University. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us, and thanks also to our audience for being here with us today. I'll start with you, sir. Do you accept the proposition that OPEC is seen by many people in the world as a secretive organization that makes decisions in its own interest, but that affect millions of people around the world?
No, it's not true. I think this is trying, some people to counterattack, OPEC by trying, not to have the correct assumptions what the OPEC rule. I think OPEC rule is very important for consumer and producers. If there is no OPEC, the world will create another OPEC, because you need a body to deregulate, the business, to create a dialogue between consumers and producers, and how to look, avoiding any shock in the market, either in the high side or in the low side.
But do you think that dialogue exists, that there's enough transparency
yes,
between the producers and the consumers?
I think we made a very successful in the dialogue. You remember years ago, no one accepted to create a dialogue. Everyone was frightened from the others. Consumers, they don't like to sit in one table or in a round table to discuss with the producers. Today, the whole world has changed. And I give an example by creating the IEF, the International Energy Forum. More than 60 countries are a member of this forum, and they are consumer and producers. If I cannot beat you and you cannot beat me, let's join me. Let's to talk. Let's to create and write the same conclusion. So I think I'm a big evidence that the consumer producers start to know how to talk with each other.
Right, Jochen Weiss, you've got a doctorate in energy and cartel law. Do you think that OPEC acts in the best interest of consumers? After all, your company sells quite a lot of energy to consumers.
I'm not going to answer that in a lot of detail. What I can say is that thanks to the contribution of OPEC, an oil price of $75 to $85 seems to be a reasonable price. In this respect, I can join King Abdullah from Saudi Arabia. This is a price which most of the consuming nations can afford, which incentivize the efficient use of energy and also create sufficient incentives to explore and produce oil. Is it fundamentally justified? The jury is still out. The long positions of the financial institutions in the oil markets are pretty strong.
But we heard just there that part of the reason, the argument for OPEC is that you sort of prevent the extremes at either end. But over the past 50 years, we haven't seen those extremes avoided. I mean, even in the last couple of years, we've seen it shoot up, again, shoot down. That's not good for consumers and presumably not for producers either.
I think you're right on that, but I don't want to go back to the history. I think what I would think that OPEC played a fairly reasonable role after the enormous financial crisis in the aftermath of the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy in 2008, when things really went down to $30 and now are picking up to the $70 to $80. That seems to be a reasonable price everyone can live with.
It doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement. Mohammed Azur, do you think that OPEC in the future, because we've just heard us pointed into the future direction there, do you think OPEC should be more transparent, that we should understand more about how and why they make their decisions?
Well, basically, I don't see any issue about transparency. To me, the oil prices have been undervalued, really. Oil has been undervalued. Let us look at all commodities over the past decades, steadily increasing. And all of these commodities and services rely on oil. So why everything is increasing, and when we see the oil rise, we
You're probably not going to get much support from our viewers watching this at home when you say that it's undervalued.
No, because you see, just look at the trend that we have. When the oil price goes up, then all commodities and services go high. When the oil prices goes down, these commodities and services stay high. It doesn't really react, with the source of energy that's supplying these commodities. So it's something that needs actually transparencies on the other side. Why are you increasing the cost or the price of commodities and services steadily, that relies and depends on the oil, while put all the blame on the oil prices? I don't see any reason for this, because we as consumers, we suffer from this. The prices go high and stay high, never goes down. Tell me about one service or commodity that went down. The airfares, they go up once the oil price goes high. Now it goes down, still airfares are high. So I think other companies...
petrol at the pump does go down a bit, doesn't it, when the oil prices go down?
You don't feel it that much. It is not like the day-to-day price that you pay for services and for commodities, for food, for transportation.
So all the outrage about oil-producing nations is actually misdirected. It should be at the operators of petrol pumps and at the airlines and at the bus companies. Is that what you're saying?
As His Excellency said this morning, the taxes. At the pump, the oil price goes high or the gasoline goes high because of the taxes, not because of the price of oil.
Deputy Prime Minister, is that your view, that it's not, the taxi drivers in Malaysia who, should be whinging at you, they should be whinging at their governments and the companies that run the actual petrol stations?
I agree with Dr. Mohammed. We have to be very pragmatic. We should not just emotional and saying, blame the oil producer. Either if the price high, they blame you. If the low price, will blame you. I mean, I remember the United States, we have two cases. One case, they call themselves the independent producers. They sue OPEC because of low price. They call dumping to the market. And then, after 2000, they sue OPEC because oil price is very high. So it's a very confused. If the price of oil low, they will sue you. If the price of oil high, they will sue you. If we go to Europe, for instance, I was telling the story that Europe is the highest tax, in the whole world. You never, in any part of Europe, you will never feel if the oil is $9 or $100, because you will pay more tax. An average on the gasoline tax in Europe is 85. And I was telling always this story when a few years ago I received an energy minister from an European country.
An unnamed energy minister
and
from
I
a
will
European
never
country.
name it, And he was complaining to me very strongly about the oil price, and he was accusing OPEC by disrupting the market, by killing even the world economy. And then I looked at him and I said, okay, Your Excellency, I have a solution to you. And he looked at me and said, what's your proposal? I said, I will offer you free oil, including the cost of transportation, including even the Suez Canal tariff. But in one condition, Your Excellency, to split the gasoline tax 50% in your country, looked to me and said, Mr. Minister, let's to change the subject.
You're not going to tell me which minister it is. You could give us a big exclusive.
I'm saying European minister. And this is also, it means not, I will say which country, because it can be in any European countries. Whether there is no different what the name of the country.
Okay, but regardless of whether or not you're willing to take responsibility or take the blame, as the case may be, isn't there also an argument that OPEC doesn't really have control over it as much as what it would like the world to believe? Because compliance is a huge issue. At the moment, it's only about 50%. Even when OPEC agrees on a target, many of the countries that are members of OPEC don't comply.
I agree with you in some part of it. Yes, sometimes, the challenge of the compliance. Sometimes, when we agreed in Wahran, 2 years ago to cut 4 million barrels, then the market changed very dramatically. You can see the oil price go even beyond what our expectations. Then, when we come to discuss, how share of OPEC in the market, I mean, you see today, when you go back in the 70s, the market, OPEC share market was almost 70%. Today is less than 40%. And there are 60% come from non-OPEC members. And when we are trying, to talk or to discuss with them, to bring them to the table to discuss, how we can because OPEC cannot solve the whole problem alone. OPEC cannot sacrifice in behalf of the others. And sometimes, when we agreed in OPEC to cut the production, and we're receiving a promising from non-OPEC not to increase the production. We don't ask them to cut the production, but not to increase the production. Suddenly we find them increasing the production. So it comes to the challenge of what my share and your share, but this is not the question. And when the price goes down, we will receive a lot of knocks on our doors from them. Please help. We will talk. We will, but they never committed.
Jochen Weiss, I just want to take this example of the hypothetical European energy minister for a moment, because I guess it raises an important question. Many people in Europe, particularly in the newspapers, we see it expressed often that people feel they're powerless to influence what happens at OPEC, these decisions that affect entire continents, entire regions of the world. There is obviously this issue about sovereign governments placing taxes on petrol and various other forms of energy. Ultimately, though, people can vote in or out those governments and those policies if they so choose. They don't have any control over what happens at OPEC. Isn't it reasonable for people to be angry at OPEC in that light?
What I think is important is that the people understand that with the growth in demand, in particular in the Asian markets, India and China, it's inevitable that a scarce and diminishing resource like oil will increase over time. What I think is very much in the interest of the consumer, as the minister said, is a reinforced dialogue between producers and consumers on the one side, and more transparencies on the fundamentals of supply on the other side. Because, as I said initially, there is an enormous speculative element in the oil price. And if we want to get that out and have more clarity on the fundamentals, I think that would be to the benefit of the European consumer, and we would have a much more rational debate about the fuel prices.
All right, let's just pause the conversation there and find out what the audience thinks about all of this so far. I think we've got some questions lined up here ready to go. If you can just tell us who you are, where you're from, and maybe pose a question to one of the panellists.
My name is Etna Trainer. I'm based in Dubai. One of the questions I'd like to ask, and particularly from the Minister too, what can you do to actually make sure that the world will be supplied with oil for the rest of our time? Because you're saying on one hand that you don't have guarantees that anyone will buy it, but yet everybody needs it.
We'll just get one more question and then we'll hand it back to our panel. Anything you'd like to find out from the panel?
Yes, I'm James McCallum of Synergy, also based in Dubai. What I would like to hear from the panel is what the panel see OPEC has as a role, and indeed the international energy companies have as a role, in encouraging the new talent into the industry that we desperately need to take forward the industry into the next decade.
So security and research and development, I guess two of the biggest questions facing the industry going forward. Deputy Prime Minister, let's start with the security issue. I mean, how can you guarantee that?
Oh, it's a very important, to focusing in the dialogue between consumer and producers. Every time when we met, one of the topic, they will talk to you about security of supply, about your role in raising funds for investing for even to exist production. And the invest was huge, is over than $100 billion, to taking a new capacity.
Okay, but the Maplecraft Energy Security Index has put OPEC member states at high risk in the long term. I mean, you might be committed
I don't think so,
to security, but others see it differently.
I don't think so. If you go back, forget the forecaster, forget, this analyst, forget what they are trying
How
to
can
sell
we
you.
forget them? That's the only indication we have.
But I will give you an actual history. You should believe the actual history, not what the assumptions, what will be happen. If you see the oil, since, okay, let's say 100 years until today, we never saw any, reacted in the security of supply. We never saw any threat in supply of oil, never.
Jochen Weissler, your company doesn't deal in just one form of energy, and you're looking at other forms. Doesn't that show that there is a risk associated with oil in the long term? And the question that we heard is quite a legitimate one. What about security of oil when every other major oil energy company in the world is looking at alternatives?
I mean, it's certainly necessary as for efficiency and also for environmental reasons to look into alternative forms of energy. We are, as Aeon Rurgas, a large gas company, and we are very much looking into increasing the demand for gas, in particular in the power sector. But recently we have also discussed, can we not use natural gas, so to speak, as a wild card in the transportation sector? Because the emissions of gas powered vehicles are much lower than those ones using diesel or gasoline. It's certainly true that we have made a lot of investments in the renewables areas, also making sure that power is produced not only from hydrocarbons but also from less polluting fuels. And given that the demand for energy in the world will increase further, in particular as populations are growing, I think we need all sorts of energy forms to provide the necessary security of supply. And this,
Mohammed, I'll just get your response to that, because it's the truth, isn't it? I mean, the future is not necessarily in oil, it's in all sorts of other energy sources.
Okay, I think first let me talk about the security of supply. I don't personally see any risk in this. And let me give you just two figures here. All OPEC countries, they have surplus production that they are not actually producing now, and if the need arises, in no time, it will be out in the market. The other issue, let us look at the oil in place. Now, we have more than 7 trillion barrels of oil in place around the world. From the start of history of oil until today, we produced only 1 out of the 7. With the current technology, we can produce 2 more trillion. So even with this, we are still left with about 4 to 5 trillion, which requires new technology. So as far as security of supply, I think the reserves are there, and we can just produce as
even
much
in the
as
long
we
term?
can. Even in the long term, because I project, I told you, since the first oil discovery until today, we only produced 1 of the 7 trillions that we have. So we still have 6. It is true we cannot produce all 6 now. With our current technology, you can produce an additional 2 trillion. But we are very busy in all research institutions, education institutions such as Texas A&M, developing this technology for the future. So I see that development is coming.
The truth is, though, governments in consuming nations are viewing oil in a very different light to the way they have previously. I mean, we see the evidence of that now with the way that the US government's responding to BP amid this oil spill off Louisiana. I mean, as an energy company, that must be a little bit scary, seeing a real shift in the way governments deal with energy companies. And I mean, maybe less so for you because you're not oil, but I mean, it's a shift, isn't it?
I mean, we are actually not selling mineral water, and therefore whether we are running as E.ON nuclear power plants or coal-fired power stations or gas-fired power stations or doing an upstream operations in the North Sea, we are dealing with very sensitive issues, and we have to act in a very responsible manner. Therefore, our benchmark for HSE standards has to be very high, and I can completely understand that governments are scrutinizing on us and checking on us, and we constantly ask ourselves, benchmarks ourselves, are we taking the best standards in industry, the best practices in industry into consideration, and are applying them ruthlessly, because there's no alternative.
Do you think that there is, just to answer the question from a member of our audience before, that there doesn't seem to be enough of a focus on what happens next, research and development, making the investments there? I mean, do you think that's happening in an adequate fashion now to respond to what clearly is a global demand for new and different sources of energy?
From the technological point of view, if you think about E&P, lateral drilling, going into very deep and tight reservoirs, that is fascinating for a young engineer. The same as developing large 5 gigawatt windmills, 5 megawatt windmills in the North Sea, operating in a very harsh environment. So I think over time we certainly have the talent, and we will be attractive for the talent. The issue is easy oil, as the minister said the other day, is to a certain extent found and produced. Now we go into much more difficult environments, be it, for example, in the Arctic Sea, be it in the Gulf of Mexico, where water depths and production depths are increasing, and therefore, inevitably, the risk will increase. But by and large, even taking this last very unfortunate event into consideration, the track record of the industry is not that bad. I would say, by and large, it's good.
Deputy Prime Minister, I think we're going to have to finish with you. It doesn't sound like any of you think OPEC is going anywhere, and that oil is going to be a major player in how the world economy functions for a very long time to come.
You see, we have to admit it, we are not against alternative. We always believe with mixed energy. The world needs mixed energy. And the world need oil, need gas, need solar, need wind, need nuclear. So all this, what we are saying today, the world with the mixed energy, that can define, and can cope with the world demand. No one can eliminate the others. I mean, sometimes, when you say that the oil era is over, this is, a guy who's dreamers, Thanks to technology, when you are looking at 20 years ago, no one can believe in this tide, structures, deep water, the Arctic. I remember in the early 1971, Shell discovered Al-Shaheen oil field in Qatar. It was a huge oil field, but tight structure, so they left. Then in the 90s, Maersk came. They developed it. Now they will exceed more than 350,000 barrels and more. So this is only because of technology advance and human resources are availability. We have a lot of challenge. We should not just sit and waste our time blaming each other.
Sounds like we answered some of your questions there. To our guests, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The Qatari Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Energy and Industry, Abdullah bin Hamad al-Attiyah. Also to Jochen Weiss, member of the Board of Directors of E.ON Ruhrgas, of course one of Europe's biggest energy providers, and also Mohammed Ajour from Texas A&M University. To our audience as well, thanks for joining us, and to you, our viewer, as always, thanks very much for watching this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your feedback and your thoughts. The address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team here at Inside Story, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.